Imagine a world where Russia decides to use a nuclear weapon in or near Ukraine. What kind of chaos would unfold? In this hypothetical scenario, we're looking at a tense political climate where posturing and threats have escalated beyond the usual rhetoric. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine have been simmering for years, with flares of conflict and international concern. But what if it goes a step further? What if Russia decided to deploy one of the most destructive weapons in its arsenal on or near Ukrainian soil? Why would Russia consider such a drastic action? There could be a multitude of reasons. Perhaps it's a show of power, a demonstration of Russia's military might and resolve. Perhaps it's a response to perceived aggression or encroachment from the West, a fierce pushback against what Russia might see as a threat to its sovereignty. Or perhaps it's a tactical move within a wider strategy, a calculated risk with the aim of achieving a specific goal. But remember, this is all hypothetical. In reality, the use of nuclear weaponry is a last resort, a line that nations hesitate to cross due to the sheer scale of devastation and the inevitable global backlash. Yet the fact remains that Russia has been making ominous noises, flexing its nuclear muscles, so to speak. From changes in nuclear doctrine to outright threats, Russia's actions have been stirring up a storm of speculation and concern. The situation is further complicated by ongoing conflicts in Ukraine, particularly in the eastern Donbas region. In the real world, the implications of such an action would be far-reaching and catastrophic. But for the purposes of this discussion, we're focusing solely on the hypothetical scenario and the potential motivations behind it. So, the scenario is set. Now let's delve into what kind of nuclear attack Russia might carry out. There are various ways Russia could potentially launch a nuclear attack. Let's delve into the different types of nuclear weapons and delivery systems Russia possesses. To start with, we have strategic weapons. These are primarily designed for long-range strikes and are often found on intercontinental ballistic missiles or ICBMs. They carry a large payload and are designed to strike major targets such as cities and military bases. Next, we have tactical nuclear weapons. These are designed for short-range use on the battlefield. They include artillery shells, torpedoes, and short-range ballistic missiles. The use of these weapons would be a drastic escalation of any conflict, as they're designed to inflict damage on a smaller scale, but in a much more immediate area. There is also the possibility of a nuclear submarine attack. Russia has a fleet of nuclear-powered submarines capable of launching ballistic missiles. These submarines can operate undetected in the world's oceans, and their missiles can reach almost any target on the globe. Now let's talk about possible targets. These could range from military installations in Ukraine and NATO bases in Eastern Europe to major cities. The choice of target would depend on the strategic objectives Russia wishes to achieve. Strategic attacks on major cities or military bases would be designed to inflict maximum damage and cripple the enemy's ability to retaliate. However, such an attack would also risk a full-scale nuclear retaliation from NATO. On the other hand, a tactical nuclear attack on the battlefield would be less likely to provoke a full-scale nuclear retaliation, but it would still represent a significant escalation of the conflict and could result in a broader war. Finally, a submarine-launched attack could potentially strike targets anywhere in the world. This would be a clear demonstration of Russia's nuclear capabilities and could be used to intimidate other nations into compliance. The types of nuclear attacks Russia could carry out are varied, but what would be the cascading effects of such an attack? The aftermath of a nuclear attack would be catastrophic, to say the least. Imagine a world suddenly plunged into chaos and destruction. A world where cities once bustling with life are now nothing more than radioactive ruins. The immediate effects would be horrifyingly apparent: widespread death and destruction, the obliteration of infrastructure, the displacement of millions of people. But it doesn't stop there. The long-term consequences are equally, if not more, devastating. The environmental impact would be immense, with radioactive fallout contaminating land, water, and air for generations to come. This would lead to a multitude of health problems, from radiation sickness to cancer and genetic mutations, affecting not just the current inhabitants, but future generations as well. The geopolitical landscape would also be forever altered. A nuclear attack, especially one instigated by a global power like Russia, would send shockwaves through the international community. It would fundamentally disrupt the delicate balance of power, leading to a heightened state of global tension and potentially even triggering a new arms race. In this tense atmosphere, The response from NATO and other global powers would be critical. Would they retaliate with their own nuclear arsenal, further escalating the conflict and causing more destruction? Or would they opt for diplomatic solutions, imposing economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation in an attempt to force Russia to back down? It's a delicate balancing act, one that could determine the fate of the world as we know it. And then there's the humanitarian crisis. Millions of people would be displaced, their homes destroyed, their lives upended. The international community would be faced with the daunting task of providing aid and support to these refugees, all while dealing with the fallout from the attack. All these factors combined would create a domino effect, each consequence leading to another, further escalating the crisis and making recovery all the more challenging. It's a grim picture, one that underscores the importance of preventing such a scenario from ever becoming a reality. The fallout from a nuclear attack would be devastating on multiple levels. But how would the world react? A nuclear attack by Russia would undoubtedly provoke a strong response from the international community. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, would be immediately thrust into the spotlight. As a collective defense alliance, its members are bound by Article 5, which declares an attack on one member as an attack on all. In response to a nuclear attack, NATO could respond in kind or opt for non-nuclear strategic maneuvers. The severity of the response would likely be proportional to the scale of the attack and the extent to which member nations were directly affected. The United Nations, the world's largest intergovernmental organization, would also play a critical role in shaping the global response. Through the Security Council, it could authorize international sanctions, impose arms embargoes, or even green-light military intervention. But with Russia being one of the 5 permanent members with veto power, the effectiveness of the United Nations response would largely depend on the stances of the other 4 members. Other global powers would likely react based on their geopolitical interests. The United States, as one of the leading NATO members, would likely spearhead the alliance's response. China, with its close ties to Russia, might find itself in a delicate position, balancing its strategic alliance with Russia against its global image and economic interests. The European Union, which counts Ukraine among its prospective members, would face a major test of unity and resolve. Sanctions could be imposed, but with Europe's dependency on Russian energy, the economic fallout could be substantial. Global alliances could shift dramatically as nations grapple with the New World Order. Nations neutral in the Russia-NATO conflict might be forced to pick a side, reshaping the geopolitical landscape in ways that could last decades. Yet it's not just about military and political responses. The humanitarian crisis that would ensue from a nuclear attack is unimaginable. The international community would need to mobilize swiftly to provide aid and relief, potentially straining resources and exacerbating existing global challenges. The world's response would be swift and severe, but what would this mean for Russia? In the wake of a nuclear attack, Russia would find itself in a precarious position. Let's first consider the international implications. With the world still reeling from the shock of a nuclear attack, Russia would likely face severe international isolation. Its relations with most countries, especially those in the West, would deteriorate rapidly. The United Nations Security Council, despite Russia's veto power, would be under immense pressure to condemn the attack. Economic sanctions would likely be swift and severe. Nations around the globe would move to cut off Russia economically, leading to a potential collapse of its economy. The ruble would plummet, foreign investment would dry up, and Russia could find itself cut off from the global financial system. But that's not all. There's also the potential for retaliation. NATO, for instance, would be under enormous pressure to respond. While a nuclear response would be a last resort, the possibility can't be entirely ruled out. Even without resorting to nuclear weapons, NATO has significant conventional military power at its disposal. Beyond the international arena, Russia's domestic situation would also be impacted. Public opinion could turn against the government, especially if the consequences of the attack and subsequent sanctions lead to a decline in living standards. This could potentially destabilize the political landscape within Russia. On the global stage, Russia's standing would be severely damaged. Its position as a major power would be undermined, and it could be treated as a pariah state, much like North Korea. Its influence in international organizations could be diminished, and its ability to shape global events would be significantly reduced. In essence, a nuclear attack would be a high-risk gamble for Russia, with potential consequences far outweighing any perceived gains. It would not only alter the geopolitical landscape, but also have profound implications for the international norms that have, until now, prevented the use of nuclear weapons in conflict. A nuclear attack would have far-reaching consequences not just for Ukraine but for Russia and the world at large. The stakes are indeed high.